In this video, I'm going to do a quick tour of Photoshop. This is Photoshop CS5. Most versions of Photoshop are similar in the tools, how they work, and where they're located. So you should be able to find just about the same things in every version of Photoshop that I'm going to show you, because I won't go into anything really advanced and detailed. I use Photoshop mostly for photo editing, and I do some graphics work, and the tools that I use kind of cross into both areas. So we'll start by looking at the toolbar on the left side. The top icon is the selection, I guess it's called the move tool. And so when you have objects on the screen, it's important to understand that Photoshop works in layers. So when you're working with different objects and you have a photograph and you insert text over it, that text is on a separate layer and you can move it around on the screen. And so that's used to move and select objects. The next tool is the marquee tool, and you have multiple types of marquee tools. Any of these tool buttons that have the little arrow in the corner of them, you can hold down on them and see more tools. So you have this in a rectangular, an elliptical, a single row, and a single column marquee tool. And the marquee tool is used to select items for editing in your image that you're working with. For example, when I'm working with a photograph, I can use this to select a particular area, and then if I want to crop or edit something that's within that area that's selected, that's what I would use that tool for. The next tool is the Lasso tool, and you also have multiple Lasso tools. The Lasso tool does the same thing as the marquee tool, but it allows you to draw with your mouse. So with the regular Lasso tool, you actually can draw with your mouse by holding the button down, and then when you're finished, you let off of it, and that's a free-form object. The polygonal lasso tool, I use this a lot to crop items out of photographs like backgrounds, and each time you click, it will draw a segment of the line. So I use this to draw around objects like that. And I'll just do this one quickly for demonstration purposes. And let's say I go all the way around, then back to the beginning, and I double click, and that would allow me to edit that portion. The magnetic lasso tool allows you to draw around an edge by dragging the mouse. So if I click here and I drag the mouse, it will try to detect that edge for me as I move along. The next tool is the quick selection tool. This also uses the same principle as the marquee tool, and it tries to use kind of a paint bucket fill method, I could say. And when you go along an edge, and drag it with your mouse button held down, it will try to detect those areas that you want to include. And so you have a regular marquee selection tool. You have an addition, so let's say this area did not detect, so I can drag it along there and it'll add. It's kind of like an eraser tool in a way. And then you have the exact opposite, which is the minus. So if this went overboard, I can remove it from there and kind of rein it in a little bit. Under that same tool, you have the magic wand tool, which will select a particular area, kind of like the paint bucket, automatically when you click on it. And it uses some settings up here for the tolerance and anti-alias, contiguous, and to sample all layers. For example, if I wanted contiguous, when I click here, it's only going to select anything that's touching that within a tolerance of 20 around it. So if I turn that up, maybe I'll go up to 40 and click here, you see how it selected more of that based on the tolerance going up. Next tool I use is the crop tool. So if I wanted to crop this photograph down to here, I use that to select, and then when I hit enter, it'll crop that image down. I can also crop by drawing a box with the marquee tool, going to image crop, and I get the same effect. The next tool I use is the eyedropper tool. The eyedropper tool selects color. So down here you see the color palette that you're working with, and if I want to grab a sample of a color, I can click on an image and it will place that color in here. So if I want this particular skin tone, I can click there and it'll tell me exactly what that is. And as I move the dropper around on the screen, you can see that it changes color where it's selecting at. The next tool I use sometimes is the red eye removal tool. So if your photograph has red eye in it, you can use it to draw a box around it and work on the red eye removal as well. Next is the paintbrush tool. And under here, the two tools that I use, the paintbrush or the pencil. The paintbrush gives you more of a paint stroke, and you can adjust the size and the width and the hardness of that brush up here. And the pencil tool draws straight, fine lines, and you can adjust that as well. The clone stamp tool is a very useful tool, and I use this all the time. In photography, a lot of times you may have someone with a blemish on their face, and we'll see if we can get rid of one of these freckles. So what we'll do is we'll adjust the size of the brush down to about that size, and I'll choose this brush. It's very soft. In a photograph, you generally want to use soft brush strokes so that they're not detectable. I'll hold down my Alt key for the area that I want to use as my source, and then I'll click on it. And then when I move my mouse over that area and click, it clones that area from that position. So I did that from about here. So wherever I go, when I move my cursor to the right about a ½ inch, it's going to copy that source that was a ½ inch from the left. So as you can see here, it's copying this darker area. As I move away, I get the lighter area. So if I wanted to cover this area, I would use something more like this area to clone. And I could just keep clicking and then cover that right up. The magic eraser and the eraser tool are two very commonly used items. The eraser tool, of course, allows you to simply erase an object. And again, just like the paintbrush, you can choose how hard or soft and what size you want that erase to be. The magic eraser is kind of like using the magic wand tool in conjunction with the eraser tool all in once. So if I click here and select, it's going to erase everything that it can detect within those tolerances. So if I turn that tolerance down a little bit and I select contiguous so that it will only erase what's around her face and click, and there it goes. The paint bucket tool is very, very easy to use. You select an area, it will have the settings of tolerance and opacity. Opacity is how transparent you want it. So if I want to fill this darker area with this color, let's say I want to fill it with bright pink, and I'm going to use contiguous, so it'll only fill around her face, and I'm going to set the tolerance to 35. And you see, I just swapped that out real easily. The blur and smudge tools are fairly commonly used. I don't use the sharpen tool very much. It just does the opposite of the blur tool. But usually if I have an area that I've edited, sometimes when you edit an area on a photograph, you can see that area has been worked on, and it is a very sharp edge. For example, I'll insert some text. And if we zoom in, we see that it has a little bit hard edges around the sides of it. I'm going to rasterize that layer so I can work with it. Then I'll use the blur tool and make my tool a little smaller. And as you can see, when I go around the edges, it tends to blur them and blend them a little bit. And so that's an example of how the blur tool works. Most commonly, I'll use it to smooth out rough edges, or if I were to use the lasso tool to cut all the way around her face and separate it, it would be a hard edge, so I would use the blur tool just to smooth it out just a little. The smudge tool allows you to just do that, just like if this was wet paint on a canvas, I can smudge it. The text tool, of course, inserts text. I just showed you an example of that. Next, I use the shape tools quite commonly, and the shape tools, you can insert all your basic shapes: rectangles, squares, rounded edge rectangles, polygons, lines, and then you can also insert custom shapes. So if you select the custom shape up here, you can choose any of these pre-made shapes. So if I wanted to insert a heart, I can do that. The hand tool is used to move an image around on the screen. So if I were zoomed in and I wanted to move this around, I can do that, kind of pan around the image. Then of course you have your magnification tool and zoom tool. You can zoom in and out with this. So if I draw a box on the zoom in tool, I can zoom right into that area. With the zoom out tool, I can click and zoom out. You can also zoom in and out in Photoshop by using Control minus and Control plus on your keyboard. Control 0 will take you back to 100% zoom, or full screen zoom, I should say. The last tool I want to go over on the bottom of the toolbar are the color tiles and the color picker screens. So there are two tiles here. One is the foreground color and one is the background color. The one on the top, the foreground color, is the one that you're working with currently, and you can have open two different colors, and you can easily switch them by using the arrow key, so you can swap out the colors that you're working with. It's a real convenient way to keep open multiple colors. When you click on the color tile, you can choose your color from the color palette and make your adjustments. This will also give you the hex number for that color, so you can get a precise color match from using this palette. And you can also use the eyedropper tool to just go to an existing image anywhere on the screen and select that color, and it will choose the color and also again give you the hex code for that color that you may need for various reasons in other programs or other photo editing programs, or if you want to match, say, text to a precise color on the screen. So there you have a basic tour of the Photoshop tools and the common tools that I use for most photo and graphic editing. Hopefully my video has been helpful to you. If it has been, please subscribe to my channel, and by all means, please share my videos.